moved again. Hi, everybody. I'm Chloe Lum, and I'm one of the programmers for Volume Montreal. Welcome to our talk this evening. I would like to start by acknowledging that Volume Montreal is based on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are recognized as the traditional custodians of the lands that we operate from. Shoshone, Montreal, is historically recognized as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is the home to a diverse group of Indigenous people and settlers. So I assume that most of you, if not all of you joining, are well familiar with Moyra Davey's work, but I'll just read her bio briefly in case anybody is just checking this out randomly. Moyra Davey's work comprises the fields of photography, film, and writing. She is the author of index cards, Burn the Diaries, The Problem of Reading, and editor of Mother Reader, Essential Writings on Motherhood. The Shabbiness of Beauty, a book of photographs by Peter Hujar and Davey, with a text by Eileen Myles, was published in 2021. Davey's work is held in major public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Tate Modern in London. She is the 2020 recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship. Moyra Davey will be showing here in Montreal in February 2022 at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery at Concordia University, of which I think at least half of the people in this chat are alumni of. So that should be really great. I got to see her show at Ryerson Image Center a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. And yeah, so Moyra, please, I'll give it to you and turn off my mic. Oh, just one thing. We will be doing, I forgot to mention also, sorry, after Moyra's first reading, she's going to be joined in conversation by artist and author Maryse Larivière, and we will be taking questions from the audience at the end of their conversation. Please type your questions in the Q&A box, which is on the right side of your Zoom panel on the bottom. And now I'll pass it to Moyra.
Thank you very much, Chloe. So thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I don't know who the participants are, but maybe I'll figure it out. I would like to know. I mean, not the participants, well, the viewers. Let's see, Maryse and I decided I would read from The Problem of Reading in this book, index cards. And I actually just wanted to show you, this was the original publication from 2003. It was just the single essay, The Problem of Reading. And it has quite a few photographs in it. Most of which, none of which got reproduced in this book. Everything got changed up in this publication, index cards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the introduction, and then I'm going to skip to, I'm essentially just going to read like 2.5 pages. I'll read the introduction. I'll summarize a little bit. I'll skip to another passage, and then Maryse and I will start to converse. So here we go. The problem of reading. What to read is a recurring dilemma in my life. The question always conjures up an image: a woman at home, half-dressed, moving restlessly from room to room, picking up a book, reading a page or two, and no sooner feeling her mind drift, telling herself, you should be reading something else, you should be doing something else. The image also has a mise en scène: overstuffed, disorderly shelves of dusty and yellowing books, many of them unread, books in piles around the bed or face down on the table, work prints of photographs, also with a faint covering of dust, taped to the walls of the studio, a pile of bills, a sink full of dishes. She is trying to concentrate on the page in front of her, but a distracting blip in her head travels from one desultory scene to the next, each one competing for her attention. It is not just a question of which book will absorb her, for there are plenty that will do that, but rather which book in a nearly cosmic sense will choose her, redeem her. Often what is at stake, should she want to spell it out, is the idea that something is missing, as in what is the crucial bit of urgently needed knowledge that will save her, at least for this day. She has the idea that if she can simply plug into the right book, then all will be calm, still, and right with the world. About a year ago, I wrote to a friend, the Canadian writer Alison Strayer, and asked rhetorically, since I found it hard to imagine that she might share my dilemma, do you ever get this frantic feeling about what to read? Alison wrote back, quote, "It is a big ongoing issue in my life. One is in a state of temporary grace while working hard on a single project for a deadline. Reading doesn't quite come up as an immediate issue. It seems that when one has answered the question, what to read, one has solved all the problems of restlessness, unfocus, and hunger of a certain sort for a good long while. Because one single reading, if one is in a centered reading state, always contains the seeds of future readings. There is a true state of bliss one arrives at when one always knows what to read next, and conversely, always a cause for concern when one doesn't know what to read." So from there, I go on to kind of describe this project that I'm going to canvas all these different writers who've written something about reading. And so, they include Stephen King, Georges Perec, Walter Benjamin. I'm just scanning through what I've written here, Italo Calvino. Okay, so now I'm going to read one more passage. "I began my research into all these questions and doubts in the usual way, by making lists and querying friends, by mining footnotes and following hunches, and I will admit it, by taking recommendations from Amazon.com. New piles grew up around the bedside, and a reading program was launched, consisting of primarily essays, a small amount of fiction, and several books in a category that is clearly a genre of its own, the memoir of a life with books. And so it is no small irony that this essay, originating in the anxious question, what to read, might possibly propel me into exactly that state of undoubting purposefulness, that state of grace and bliss that my friend Alison described. The state of grace is at its height while reading a Virginia Woolf essay in the early morning with the first cup of coffee when no one else is awake, or when seated before the computer, the muddle in my head manages to find a clear shape on the screen. But what about the day spent poring over Harold Bloom, laboriously ticking off passages and transcribing them to my yellow pad, along with page numbers, and feeling my own sense of agency dwindling under the weight of his relentless erudition? What pleasure is there in reading when the price to be paid is an axe hanging over your head, an essay to be produced? How to escape the little voice that says, you cannot do this, you will fail? Where is the middle ground between absorption and anxiety, gratification and toil? Or is it simply that any creative project, especially writing, will always exact this price? Are the rewards of achievement always to be kept company by struggle and self-doubt? Now it's clear I'm not even talking about reading anymore, I'm talking about writing. Was I supposed to read more, Maryse, or stop?
One more paragraph, yes. The last paragraph here on
During
this
the
page.
time During the time I was preparing this essay, I often made a slip and said that I was working on an essay about writing rather than my true topic, reading. Obviously, reading and writing are connected. Jean-Paul Sartre and many other writers have said, reading is writing, by which I understand that as readers, we are always piecing together meaning and, in a sense, writing our own text by weaving the threads and associations of previous readings and experiences. But by this, I don't mean to suggest that reading and writing are one and the same. Writing is infinitely harder. The central question I mean to pose is, what if the most gratifying reading is the one that also entails the risks of producing a text of one's own?
Thank you, Moyra. That was beautiful. So in this same essay, The Problem of Reading, you also describe your relationship to reading as one that is done, as Virginia Woolf puts it, with pen and notebook, one that implies a relationship to writing and working. So how does reading propels you to write? So that would be my first question. How does reading Virginia Woolf propels you to write?
I will definitely talk about Virginia Woolf, but just, more generally, I think, reading leads to reading, as I say in the beginning of the essay. And then I think, I just follow, as a reader, I just follow my appetites. And inevitably for me, that reading leads to writing. And I always know where I'm going to start something. I always have, a kind of, a sort of key, it's usually the most pressing idea. But I have no idea where I'm going to end up. And, but I try as much as possible to keep the idea of playfulness alive in what it is that I'm doing, that I'm working on when I write. And honestly, that's something I tell myself more and more about everything these days. And yeah, I loved watching the young Canadian tennis players in the US Open. I don't know if any of you, I
watched it, yes.
I was glued. I was just riveted to those matches. And they always talk about, I'm just going to go out there and have fun. And so it's the same idea to try and put the focus on that, on play and on fun.
And what about reading Virginia Woolf? How does that propel your writing specifically?
Well, I'm a huge fan of her essays. And
well, index card certainly brings that up because she's all over it.
Yeah,
that's something that's obvious to me, at least. But
yeah, I find her essays incredibly inspiring. I'm not such a huge reader of her fiction, to be honest, like especially her modernist fiction, although I did recently listen to The Waves, which I'd never read or listened to. And I did that because a friend recommended it to me to sort of try and solve the problem, a voice problem that I was having with something that I'm working on now. But for me, it's always been the essays, and like for instance, her essay on being ill, which there's just like the way they detour and the way they're really the way they kind of start in one place and end up somewhere completely unexpected. It's her essays are incredibly modern. That I don't know, it's a kind of kind of modern that I appreciate, I guess, the nonfiction modern of Virginia Woolf.
I mean, it's something I've noticed actually, which is that like you're very much of the embodying this figure of the flanners, of Woolf's flanners, your intellectual journey through books, but also your journeys through New York. So I've been thinking a lot about that while reading index card, like trying to notice like all the places that you're going, but also thinking about your videos where you walk and pace around your apartment as well. So how's that specificity of Virginia Woolf, who also writes and walk and think, you know, it's a very active way of writing. Is that something that influences you actually?
I mean, I love her essay, Street Haunting, where she, you know, she decides she needs to buy a pencil. And so that takes her on this evening walk through the streets of London and the bookstores. And it's, yeah, it's key. I think that what she's going to buy is a pencil, because ultimately it's the essay is about reading and writing. And I mean, I think that like the idea of yeah, I think it's the idea of the flâneuses is definitely it's apropos, and the idea of dérive also is something that, I mean, I definitely wander. I wander in, you know, in the way, you know, in my writing. And
do you think that's something specific to the fact that as you come to writing as an artist, like you come to writing very performatively in a way? Would that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like this is basically like I edited Mother Reader and I wrote a short introduction, and then I really wanted to, you know, to write something. I after all that reading that I did to as research for Mother Reader. And so, you know, the problem of reading is kind of the first thing that I wrote. And it's definitely, it's like, it's actually the most formal of any essay that I've written. And since then, I completely gave myself permission to write in a way that is, yeah, just sort of allows for a lot more freedom in terms of incorporating different voices, different pronouns, and, you know,
and experimenting with like recording your own text and then re-listening to them while performing them.
Yeah, so that became, you know, that eventually a lot of these texts got translated into narrations for videos. And, you know, my whole background is as a visual artist, so I think it's really you know, I still have that strong attraction to the image, the still image and the moving image. And when, you know, now when I'm writing, I'm thinking even more about the moving image, frankly.
Do the text or the image come first, or is it always in flux? Is that, or impossible for you to necessarily locate?
I mean, sometimes, you know, a text will just start with an image. Sometimes it'll start with a problem that I'm trying to figure out. But in terms of the videos, yeah, the text always comes first. And I haven't always been successful at translating a text into a video. There were a couple of times where I had to completely abandon a text that I had written and take a different approach to making the video. Yeah.
But sometimes it's good to put a text aside and let it wait on it until later on. You can pick it up later and then see what happens with it.
Yeah.
Well, to talk about in terms of like your practice and how writing and visual arts or moving and still images informs your work all at the same time. But that was not always the case. There was a shift at some point, and it was with this video, 50 minutes, that this shift happened in your practice and went from art photography to performance video. And this video documents this first instance of you reading as performance. So how has art writing become an imperative in your work at that time? I was curious about the context in which it emerged and that led you to write and perform.
So I had been, like I said, I'd been making photographs, for decades. And then I edited this book, Mother Reader. It came out in 2001. And I felt like I had kind of come to an impasse with photography as I was practicing it then. And I had a strong urge after all this reading to write something. 9/11 had happened. I had wanted to write about that. And I hoped that this writing would become a video, but I had no idea. I actually did make one other Super 8 film in 1990 called Hell Notes, where I'm not reading, I'm memorizing. And in fact, in 50 minutes, it's most of it is memorized. Actually, it's all written, but I'm trying to memorize these passages and for the most part failing miserably. Sometimes I pick up a piece of paper and I start to read because I've just I'm so frustrated with my poor memory. But so that, the hope was that this piece of writing would become a video, but it was all it was an experiment. I really had no idea. And the whole time I was making it, took me 3 years to make it because I was trying to memorize everything. Afterwards, I started, reading and listening, and then I could make something much, much faster because I didn't have this memorization problem.
But then you got really excited about this new way of making art. And so that led to more work and made this way. And so you said also, but you mentioned also like how Mother Reader was this moment, like this work of assembling and editing Mother Reader really pushed you to triangulate writing and video and photography. And so I was really curious about like how you got thrilled and excited about this research and that like really pushed you to make that work. After and like you bring this research into your visual work.
Yeah. I think actually the first thing I did was I wrote this essay.
Mm-hmm.
Now that this was 2003, and I was teaching at Vermont College, this low residency MFA program, and we would take turns giving lectures. So I wrote it as a lecture for Vermont, the Vermont College students and faculty, and so yeah, then 50 minutes came like just on the heels of this.
Yeah. I guess I'm sorry, maybe I was not precise enough. Like how thoughts on motherhood triggered that excitement to have this shift happen in your practice. I guess if I want to be more precise in the question.
Yeah, actually, after it was difficult to continue my work as an artist after I had a baby, and editing a book somehow was easier to do than to be making photographs. And why was that exactly? Because writing is not easy for women who've had babies by any means, but I wasn't really writing. I was reading, and I was editing, and I was collecting these pieces on maternal ambivalence and motherhood and creativity and so on. And I mean, I think, motherhood affects your whole being. And, so as an art, it will affect you as an artist. Some people choose to keep the two very, very separate. Other people let the experience just, completely make its way into their work. I didn't have a strong urge to write about my son when he was a baby or a small child. He shows up in some of the videos as a participant, but he didn't really make it in make his way into anything that I wrote until he became an adult, actually. And then I started to write about him, and I continued to write about him as an adult. And I don't know why that is. And I didn't photograph him either when he was younger, except thousands of snapshots, but I didn't. And now I'm photographing him and making formal photographs of him and his friends as part of my work.
Maybe it has to do with how he can consent and be a full participant in your work, maybe.
Yeah,
because he's probably very much an adult now.
Yeah, he's 24. Yeah. No, for sure. There has to be that that level of consent.
So would you say that all this research that has happened quite a while ago for Mother Reader still informs your work today?
It still is. That book is still with me. I mean, I still pick it up and I read it. I read from it. More and more, actually, men are telling me that they're reading it, which I find really interesting. Like a lot of men who want to know about their mothers and who want to write about their mothers. Not a lot of men, well, a few men, friends of mine have told me that they've been reading it and that it's been really helpful for so it's it definitely it stays with me as a project.
That's interesting to hear men are interested in this conversation about motherhood and art production and how you approach it, which is I think it's a really subtle thread in Index Card where there's a mention of your son or being pregnant or family or familial intimacy, but it's true that it's not something that you actually focus on as a topic in your work, but it's somewhere in there in the writing, and actually it's curious to know how this mixing life, art, and theory for you is productive in your writing, in your work. How does that function for you?
I mean, I think it's what, it's like drawing on all those things is what enables me to write anything at all, frankly. And I'm not so focused on theory. I did read some theory when I was younger, and
but by theory I mean at large. I mean like Woolf is theory, or
like what?
Like Virginia Woolf, I mean,
yeah.
I don't mean like a
yeah. I mean, it feeds me, and I like to put different writers and theorists and artists and filmmakers, thinkers in conversation with one another. And I think to that end, I've made healthy use of citation in my writing, and I think it's, you know, I think it's good. I think it you know, it really brings something to the texts, you know, to have all these different voices and to try, you know, to be trying to connect them. But I decided, you know, kind of recently that I was going to try and do less of that and try and do my own kind of like my own writing, make it more descriptive and observational, and
focus on your voice.
Yes, exactly. And I did that, but in fact, inevitably all these other writers still made their way into the text. I couldn't
walking along with you.
Exactly.
And someone else has noticed the motherhood. I mean, in your work, this thread of motherhood, and so I was reading Dr. Catherine Chagnon, who's a Montreal art historian, and she makes this beautiful, I mean, she's referencing Hervé Guibert's metaphor of écriture inséminatrice, and so which would make reading an act of insemination. And she suggests that we think of your body of work as impregnated by the fertile oeuvre of other writer. And so I'm referencing to this practice of citation of yours. So I guess how do you feel about this suggestion by Madame Chagnon? And how, I mean, I guess, like, how does literary references truly function within your work? I mean, I guess we already addressed that a bit, but I was curious about this reference. I thought, yeah.
No, I love her essay. I read it in Spirale, and I thought it was very, very touched by it. And I yes, I think it's her observation is absolutely correct, you know, and I just love the subtle way that, you know, that she does that, you know, that she expresses that thought in the essay.
Then she pulls, like, many of your work, she pulls them within this thread without necessarily or in a very subtle manner. Yes.
And I love that she wrote about me in relation to Hervé Guibert, because he's one of my favorite writers. So I was really honored by that.
I guess I was also wondering, and to paraphrase French author Marie Dariussec, who translated Virginia Woolf very recently, and she translated it in a very interesting way. She titles it Un lieu à soi, which is a space of one's own, because she did this translation because she didn't like how it was previously done and translated into une chambre à soi, which would mean a bedroom of one's own. So that's why she really wanted to get into this.
Okay.
And so I thought, and so reading her, she's talking about, in her introduction, she's talking obviously about Woolf, but she mentioned this, and I want to, she's asking the question about Woolf, but I want to ask you the question. And so is it possible that your flux of words and images is of the order of écriture féminine? Because it's not something I actually thought of your work when I first approached it. And then it became more, the more I got to know your work and read your essays and see more and more videos and exhibition, it became very poignant to me that it could be of écriture féminine. What do you think about this proposition?
I mean, for the longest time, I read mostly women authors, and it wasn't even a conscious choice. It was just that's what I was drawn to. And I've read some of like those, some of the like Kristeva and Sixou. It's been a really long time. I didn't read them deeply at all. But I mean, I think that in the sense that I think I'm constantly writing the body, and maybe that ties what I do to écriture féminine.
Oui.
I can't help it. It just it happens, and most of the time I let it stay in. But I mean, the sort of corpus of writers still that, I mean, there's, that I feel very, very drawn to are people like, Annie Ernaux, who I've read for a very long time. I've read her for decades. And Chris Kraus and Diaries also.
Who are also very much contemporary flanners as well. So
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
how do you feel walking along these other women?
I mean, I love them. I love them as writers. And I haven't read Diaries, although I just got a book by her called Les Yeux Verts, which I haven't read, but I think it's a collection of short pieces by her. So it's been a while since I read her, but of course, she was a filmmaker. Also, her film Le Camion is one of my all-time favorite films. But I think all of those writers employ some form of dérive and also non sequitur, just kind of like giving themselves permission to just kind of move around and to not have everything be this like enchaînement, one thought leading to another. And when writing an essay, for instance, like Chris Kraus does that, she'll just make these kind of radical leaps, into a whole other area of thought, like when she writes her essays about artists, for instance. So, all of that I find really liberating to read. And yeah.
Do you feel sometimes you feel limited, in your dérive, or in terms of like also addressing like the private and well, when you talk about your life and art and addressing, because of this posture of the flanners sometimes comport certain risk taking. Do you find it's also can be also limiting posture or risk taking posture? Or maybe it's not in your experience at all. I don't know.
I mean, I would love to be able to write a novel, but I don't think it's possible. I don't think I could do it. I think in a way, I am limited to a certain way of thinking about writing, and it's the limitation with a novel, I think for me has more to do with stamina. Like I can't really write more than 7,000 words and just kind of keep it all in my head, and even that is it's kind of pushing a limit, like But I guess novelists have all these techniques for, diagramming things and keeping track of what's going on. But I have
Maybe.
go ahead.
No, well, just finish with that. I thought you were. I don't mean to interrupt you, but because I mean, I like this thing that you're saying, like diagramming, because when I look at, I confess, and so, and I mean, hearing what you just said, like with your essay, and then like, which I mean, this is gonna lead to my next question, but like, like with all the images and which traverse the essays. And some of our photographs, some of our reproductions from the video, as I understand.
Yeah.
And there's even a mailer included in it, which I thought was amazing. And so maybe your way of diagramming your novel is to have these visual elements within the book. I mean, that's my question actually. How does the book function within the exhibition? How does it expand beyond the limit of the exhibition space or the work, the video work?
Yeah.
Or the book expands the work. Sorry.
I mean, I think it is very much an artist's book. It's kind of like it's a hybrid, because there are two very beautiful essays in there by Andrea.
That's true.
The curator, and Dali Giroux. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like half and half. But I really, I had just done the Scotiabank monograph. I won the Scotiabank Photography Award, and I did the monograph. And so for the National Gallery, I didn't want to repeat something like that. I really wanted to do a book that was, smaller in scale and soft cover, and more of a kind of, an experiment, a sort of artist's project. And I think my part of the book is like an artist book, but then it has these, more art historical or perhaps
interpretive work by a curator. But is Dali's text the text that she's discussed in the video, or it's a completely separate text?
So some of the text is what she speaks in the video.
Okay.
It got transcribed and put in into the book. And then she also wrote an essay. She was commissioned to write an essay.
An essay, so that's two different things. Yes. Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. And what and in the mailer, I've been curious about them, because I mean that's the first, not this one. The first one I've seen is at John Goodwin's gallery in Toronto that you sent them, maybe I think probably late 2000, I don't know, mid 2000s, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that's the first instance of me approaching your work. And so I've always been curious, because how do you feel about manipulating the photograph like this? Because I mean, art photographers have, deal with their work in a very precious way, and like everything has to be pristine and perfect, which is amazing. But I mean, you totally not do that. You fold them, you put stamp, you ship them in the mail system. Like, do you feel a bit guilty about doing this?
I mean, I worked in that very pristine way for a long time. I would often frame my photographs, although I did also just put them up behind glass. I did like to treat the photograph as not so precious, but yes, I did end up, matting and framing many of my photographs. And I think it was that way of working actually that partly led to this decision that I took to stop making photographs and to try writing instead, and to think about the moving image. And because I felt cramped by it. I think I felt there was something, it wasn't working for me anymore. And so I took a break. And then, in fact, John Goodwin was showing the video 15 minutes. And he always makes a little poster for every show that he did at Goodwater. And he said, why don't you just take some photos from the screenshots from the video, make them into prints the same size as my little poster, fold them up and send them to me, and I'll make my little mailer from, you know, your one of the images. And he was the first one to take, I think I sent 15 or 16 different images, and he put them in a grid. And he basically made the first mailer, in fact.
Well, that's interesting to know.
Yeah.
I was not aware of this.
And I didn't think too much of it until a few years later. I was in Paris. I had one of the studios at the Cité. I had the Canada Council studio, and I was asked to be in a group show in New York. And I was working on a video, but it was nowhere near finished. And I did not want to, you know, frame and crate and ship photographs for the show. And I remembered what John had done with the mailers, and I proposed to the gallery, Marie Guy, that I do the same thing. And that's actually when I started taking photographs again. I was in the cemeteries a lot, all the different cemeteries in Paris, shooting videos. So I started to take photographs of writers' graves, notably, and I also and photographs of the outdoor cafe tables after people had left. That's kind of when I start, and I loved the whole process of just treating the photograph like Chris Kraus called it, a giant postcard, just like this piece of paper that you fold up and write on and tape it and drop it in the mail. It was really liberating for me, and it was my way back into photography.
Well, that's very interesting. Yes, this shift also makes me think how, I mean, through your performance where you read and also mailing these photographs as mail art, it's a gesture towards being in relation with others, you know, and very much fast-paced and very physical. And the active mode of art make or photography making or even writing with visuals, you know, sending the messages, maybe a bit like difficult to decrypter.
Yeah, I know. Decrypt.
Decrypt, yes, but still.
Decipher.
Decipher, yes.
No, it is definitely. It's kind of an epistolary form, you know, taking a photograph. Yeah.
Maybe my last question, but not the least, and which is that I got really excited about your show at the National Gallery, because they were presenting your work, which includes a conversation on Joyce Wieland's work. So even more excited was I to read that you have seen her work and her exhibition back in the 70s, her exhibition True Patriot Love as a young girl. So and you mentioned how that exhibition was a determinant for a moment for you, and so I'm just really curious if you remember anything from that. I mean, you say in the book that you have a really strong memory of wandering around Joyce Williams' exhibition. So anything you can share with us, any detail, I would be very, very curious about this.
I mean, honestly, I was 12 years old and I knew I wanted to be an artist. And so I had started going to museums, and I think I had an afternoon off from school or something like that. And I was, the strongest memory, honestly, is being practically the only person in this museum at the time. There was, I don't, there were no other people, or hardly any other people, and just kind of wandering around and looking at these giant quilts that she had made, the Reason Over Passion quilt that she did in many, many different versions of that quilt. And I had heard stories about it. Like I had heard that she wanted to drop it on the Parliament buildings in Ottawa from a helicopter or something.
Really? But you've heard this from like your parents or from the news?
I did hear it. Yes, at the time I heard it. So it was, it was more, I don't remember, except for those quilts, I don't remember like the specificity of any of the other works, but it was this feeling of awe, I think, just, the monumentality of the works, and having, oh, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I sort of came to know Joyce Wieland a bit more in later years, because I watched that film that she made with Hollis Frampton in Ontario in 1967 or something, with the Bolex cameras. I forgot what it's called. And then actually recently there was a show in New York, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago, where this protest film that she made, where you just see like feet.
Oh, was it at the MOMA?
It was actually at the old Dia building on West 22nd Street. It was a really good show. It was about protest and activism.
Okay.
So it's, it's more, I think it's more the films, that I think about. Why do you ask? Are you researching Joyce? Are you researching her?
Yes, I really very much love her work. So I mean, I thought it was quite amazing that the two of you meet, which for some reason I didn't think could ever happen. So it was such a beautiful surprise. But I mean, I guess I was thinking like you mentioned you were 12 years old when you saw this exhibition. I guess I'm thinking about like maybe like because there were live animals maybe, and or a giant cake as an artwork. So I thought I guess I was wondering as a kid, like what's one relationship to such unusual artwork, especially at the time when most exhibition are presenting like painting, historical painting, like to be a girl and see this show where there's a huge cake and like animals and like quilts, it's very unusual. So I guess I thought maybe there would be some kind of sensory memory that would come up or something, but
yeah,
but maybe it's more like as you described, a more general feeling of the exhibition.
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember being shocked, to see an exhibition that was, all these unconventional, forms of art. There was tons of public art in Ottawa at the time. And I don't know, I had been to Expo. I had spent like nearly a whole year at Expo 67. When I was however old I would have been, 9 years old. Okay. I actually had a little passport, and I also had a Metro pass, and I went like every chance I could get by myself. 9-year-olds could go by themselves on the Metro in those days. And I just drank Expo 67. So I think I had probably that experience of seeing all this, like, incredible architecture and films
and technology and
yeah. I think that probably it really broadened my horizons in terms of like what art and design and architecture could be. It was one of the highlights of my childhood, honestly, was Expo 67. And it was like my first taste of freedom. And, I remember the film Labyrinth, this incredible montage by the NFB people, things like that.
And the Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the public transit in the air.
Yes, that would be incredible little, I forget what it was called. The mini rail, maybe it was called
I think it's mini rail, you're right, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all these thoughts with us tonight, Moyra. That was really lovely. Thank you so much for your generosity.
Thank you for your generosity, Maryse. Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you both. That was really wonderful. If anyone in the audience has any questions, please go for it.
Where would they be in the chat?
They would be in the Q&A box, but we don't have any yet.
Okay.
Maybe I'll give people a moment if they want to formulate something.
Okay. Walk me through. How do I get to see who's here?
Okay, click where it says participants.
Okay.
And then you can
attendees. Okay.
I'm pretty sure there's a couple people in the attendees.
Okay. Hi Vincent.
Vincent, il est là?
Oui, il
est là. Bonjour Vincent.
Wait, who else? Is there anybody else? It's totally fine if people don't have questions.
Okay, well, did you have any? No, that's a thank you. Did either of you have anything else you want to say if there's no questions?
No, I mean, it's really been a pleasure to be in conversation with Maryse and to think about the book from, her perspective. These are all questions that I haven't had from anybody else. And so I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a great pairing. Well, I'm so grateful to the both of you for sharing your thoughts and spending your evening with us. Is extremely generous. It's always really interesting as someone who is very interested in the practice of citation. It gives me a lot of joy to hear how other artists and writers work around these ideas. And, I just wanted, I guess, maybe to give a quick comment before we go, since you mentioned Chris Kraus so many times. It was on a writing residency with Chris Kraus, where I was working on a script for a video, and she recommended that I read your books. And I had seen your work in galleries and seen some of your videos at the time, but I hadn't read your writing and didn't even really know I mean, there was the narration in the video, but I didn't know that they existed as books. And it was just a really productive reading for me. And, you know, having that suggestion from someone that you're reading it just feels like a very nice little bow on this idea of reading and as a kind of creative practice. Well, thank you so much to everybody who joined us. We have a whole lot of programmation, both online and in real life for this edition. We will be doing another Zoom tomorrow night with author and artist Harry Dodge, who will be in conversation with art critic Sky Gooden. And throughout all of October, we have all kinds of talks and panels. These can all be found on the Volume Montreal website and on our social media. And of course, we have, for people who are in Montreal, the fair is going on this weekend. And we have a live scoring conversation with the live artist Dana Michelle and poet and editor Michael Nardone going on Saturday that people can join us for. Thanks so much for everybody's time, and I hope you all have a great night thinking about these wonderful ideas of citation and reading.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much.
All right, Volume out.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.